I'm going to go ahead and needed lots of tissues. Sorry, lots of things up here. Be honest with you and tell you that I'm a little nervous. I successfully avoided public speaking classes in all of high school, all of college, and the largest number of people I've spoken to in a room was probably 50. And it was a room full of people I know from my church, and that was 4 years ago. So just confessing that, I'm having a little sweating through my shirt, like there's, and I've been a little nauseous, but I want to share my story with you this morning, and I also should confess that I'm going to work really hard to not curse this morning. I recently read that in a book, I've got to read this to you. She said, it talks about an inarticulate that people experiencing grief turn to cursing because the English language no longer, it comes to its end of being able to describe this inarticulate sorrow. And so, and I thought this explains so much. I get this now, but I'm going to tell you my story and back off of that, I think, this morning. But my story, I think I have some pictures that are coming in. So this is my husband, my late husband, Brock, and that was our engagement picture in 2004, I think. And then the next one, so these are my children, Emery, Lila Kate, and Charlie. And we're in the middle of birthday season at our house. All of the birthdays are within 2.5 weeks, which was not planned, but we just cram it in. And so Charlie turned 6 on Thursday, and Emery and Lila Kate will have birthdays in the next 2 weeks, and they'll be 11 and 9, I think. So anyway, so that's us. I got to find my notes here. So I'm 38. Like I said, I have 3 children. I run a ranch for a living, which I inherited from my husband. We used to do it together. He sort of ran the show, and I just kind of showed up. But now it's mine to run, and we were married for almost 12 years when he passed away, and I moved to the Bryan College Station area in 2002 after I graduated from LSU, which I did go to the game this year. My 10-year-old refused to sit with me. He sat with grandma and uncle instead. But I've been here ever since, and I call this place home. And so when I moved here, Brock was still in school. He finished up at Texas A&M, and then he continued on some more. And then he ended up getting hired at A&M, and so he worked there in the ag engineering department. And I want to stop and just say that my husband was an exceptional man. He was brilliant, a lot going on. He was the best time manager that you've probably ever met, and I'm the extreme opposite of that. But we together, there was a balance there that I felt like was beautiful, and he was a proud father, and he loved people, and he cared about their hearts. And so I just wanted to stop and tell you about him and honor him and who he was. And then I'm going to back up and tell you a little bit about my story. I came to know the Lord as a young, in elementary school, and have been walking with the Lord ever since. And so that story kind of went on, and I cringe at some of my self-righteous behavior that came out in high school and as a young adult. So I've been living that imperfectly, but been walking with the Lord for a long time, and I feel like my life was kind of just a little bit boring and uneventful for the first 3 decades, and but it's changed a lot in the last 5 years, and so that's what I'm here to tell you And we all have a story. And so this is my story, and I want to just say that there's some really hard things in it, but it's not the most tragic story in this room, and I'm certain of it because the Lord is good and kind and faithful. And so all of these hard things, from the outside, they sound tragic, but there's a bigger story that's been written along the way. And I wanted to share with you this morning because my story's not wrapped up in pretty paper and a nice bow. I'm very much living in the middle of heartache and sadness and really difficult things. And I have 3 wonderful children, but they're hard. And being a single mom and raising kids, it is no joke. I mean, it's no joke for any of us, but it's a lot of work. And so, yeah, I'm feeling really nervous again, but what I want to tell you this morning is that our circumstances don't define what's true about the Lord. My circumstances don't define what is really true about the Lord. And so I'm going to go back to 5 years ago. I think every year for 5 years in a row, it felt like the hardest year of my life. And that started back in 2013. I had just had Charlie, and my hormones were a little out of control, and I cried in the doctor's office a lot. And so we figured out how to get those hormones back in check, and it changed my life. And then I thought, okay, 2014, here we go. I can breathe. Got 3 kids. My husband's got a good job. Like, we're moving forward. And in February of 2014, some strange symptoms started to show up, and my husband, who was a workhorse and didn't stop, began to get really fatigued, and there was other things going on, and so I just, did what any good wife would do and stayed up late searching on WebMD to figure out what was going on, and I began to put these pieces to the puzzle together, and the symptoms were all pointing to leukemia. And am I still on? Yeah, okay. They were all pointing to leukemia, and I remember thinking, this can't be right. He's not sick, but how could this be right? And I remember crawling into bed that night and just praying over him and asking the Lord to heal him, and just begging that I was somehow wrong, and that I was mistaken, and I was just being a little overzealous with WebMD, and this was not right, But the next day, I called and made an appointment for him because he wanted to go to work and teach his classes, and so I called and said, hey, we're really concerned. He had blood work done that day, and by 5 o'clock, he was admitted to St. Joe's with all signs pointing to leukemia. And so our life changed in February of 2014, and we were quickly transferred to MD Anderson in Houston to be treated in the leukemia department there. And so, it just overnight, life turned upside down. And so so that year, he began the protocol, which was it was a 3-year protocol, and the first 6 months were intense. And so he was back and forth to Houston a lot, and stayed in Houston for the first 6 weeks. And I had our children, which at the time were, how old were they? Charlie was a baby, so he was 1. I was still nursing him, so 1, 4, and 6. They had just all had birthdays, and so here I was with young children, and my husband is fighting this terrible disease that's overtaken his body. And it's the kind of cancer that you find out you have it, and you either make a decision to treat or you have a matter of days, weeks at max. And so we made the decision to treat it. And all of the signs and the markers, he was a 32-year-old man who was healthy or otherwise healthy and strong. And so they were all pointing to a full recovery. And so he went through that treatment, which was excruciating, but we have an amazing church family and friends that stepped in and really walked along beside us, and I'm so grateful for them. We could not have possibly done what we did without them. And so he was in remission, and in February of 2015, we were through the first year, and he was continuing monthly maintenance at that point. But in April of 2015, we found out that the cancer had returned, which at that point in our life was our worst fear, that this cancer wouldn't be beat and that it would come back, and it happened. And so we had to make a decision, and he went through the process of stem cell transplant, which is an excruciating process. And what they do is they put chemicals in your body to bring you as close as they can to death without crossing that line. And then they transplant someone else's blood, their bone marrow, into your body to try to bring you back. And so he likened it to his body feeling like it was being burned from the inside out over a period of weeks, and as the grafting process took place. And the first 100 days of that are the most intense, and kind of if you get past that window, you can take a deep breath. And he got past that window, and so in fall of 2015, he came home, and then in January, through this whole process, we were in the middle of, we had started before he got sick, creating house plans to build out on our ranch. And so we made the decision to move forward with those house plans in faith that the Lord would, that we would be able to enjoy as many years as we possibly could out there, whatever that looked like. And so in January of 2004, Brock had the best blood work he'd had since he had gotten sick. That's what the numbers showed. On January 19th, we poured a slab in our house, and then on February 1st, we went in for just a checkup, and we found out that the cancer had returned again. And so it was a failed stem cell transplant, and the doctor basically said, maybe a year, which was devastating. But what we really had was 2 weeks. And so 2 weeks later, on February 13th, his body started to decline and his organs started to shut down. And in that period between February 1st and and the 2 weeks later, we prayed for a miracle. And we'd been praying for a miracle the whole time and believing the Lord for that miracle, and believing that he could heal him. And I still believe that that's true. That's just not what happened for my story. And so on February 17th, I sat in a hospital room with my 34-year-old husband and held his hand as he took his last breath. And the line on those monitors, it really does go flat. And so I said goodbye, and I was filled with peace that, here's where we are. But another, all these worst fears coming true and living them out. And so I left that hospital with 2 friends, and I drove home to go and to be with my children so that I could tell my children that their dad was not coming home from the hospital this time, and that the doctors were no longer able to to get no longer able to help his body, and so that he was with Jesus. And man, that was a hard day, which feels mild, like to say that was a hard day. We woke up the next morning, and that was the first day of our lives where he wasn't physically in it anymore. And so we began putting one foot in front of the other. And here I was with 3 small children, and my husband, who we'd been together for 16 to 18 years, depending on who you asked. But he was no longer with us physically, and so so there we are. Here's our new life, and so I moved forward with our build. I continued to build our home on the place that my husband had taught my children to love, and he taught them to love working cattle and being out on open space. And so I really felt strongly that that's where we needed to be. And so we finished it. And 6 months later, we moved in. I packed up our things in the home that we had shared together and moved my kids out to our property. And we continued on with life and continued on with that first year. And I just want to say, people kept saying, just get through the first year. The first year's the hardest. And for me, it wasn't the hardest because I could do anything once. I'd done all of this stuff once before, or had lots of firsts, but it was the second year where it was, okay, that was the first of the rest of my life that he's not here. And so the reality, like the shock wearing off, and the reality of, this is real, this is happening. So it got harder. So I thought that surely 2016, the hardest year of my life. But then 2017 happened. And 3 days shy of 6 months in our new home, our house was struck by lightning, which by any insurance definition is an act of God. And it started a fire in our home, and we were there that day, and barely made it out. And so 2 of my children were with me, and they started screaming, and I feel like me running when they were screaming was a miracle in and of itself, because they scream all the time, and I don't go running. But there was something about that scream, and so I ran, and when I rounded the corner in our home, our living room was filling with smoke. And so there was 18 steps from when I saw the smoke to when making it out the back door. And I'm gonna stop real quick. Sorry. But there's 18 steps, and by the time we got to the back door, my house was filled with smoke. So we had less than 20 seconds to get out of the house. And when I stepped out that back door, my oldest son was with me, and he was in front of me, and I turned around to grab Lila Kate, and she wasn't there. And so I did, left all the rules behind. I could not see her. My house was filled with smoke, but my baby was in there, and I thought she was in there, and so I ran back in and left my son on the back porch, and he's watching me go back in this house that's filled with smoke, and I couldn't see her, and my eyes were burning, and my lungs were burning, and my skin was burning from the chemical reaction that had taken place of this particular kind of smoke that was filling my house. And so I came back out to get a breath, and then I went back in a second time, and I still couldn't find her. And I remember being on that back porch, and I had 2 thoughts, and one of them was, is this what this feels like to lose a child to. And Lord, help me. As I was preparing to go back in a third time, my son had followed our fire exit plan and gone around to the front, and he found Lila Kate. She had gone out the front door, and none of us knew it. And so there were my two children there and safe. And I'm so grateful. The Lord protected my family that day. But I think one of the hardest things that I began to have to reconcile is that day turned out okay, and it turned out how I wanted it to turn out. But I'd lived the day where it didn't turn out how I wanted to turn out, and that was the same God. And he was with me the whole time. And that he was with me the whole time, and nothing had changed. And the reality that had she not been waiting on the other side, that wouldn't have changed anything about who the Lord is. And having to sit with that and say, thank you, Lord, for sparing all of us, and you are God no matter what. So it's been a hard few years. And we continued to press forward, and I've become keenly aware recently that some of the themes in my story have Hollywood or movies think that they're the most tragic lines, because it seems that every movie I'm watching, there's a parent with small children that have died, or somebody has leukemia, or there's a house fire. I'm like, oh, okay, so I've got these worst case scenarios, and what I want to tell you this morning is that the worst case scenarios, I've lived them, and you don't have to be afraid of the worst case scenarios. They're painful and hard, but you don't have to be afraid of them. I want to share with you, I'm going to just directly read this because I want to be able to convey to you. I feel like I've told you the stories, the events that have happened in my life, but I wrote this to a friend who had experienced her own loss, and so this is what I told her. I don't pretend to understand your loss. Our losses were very different. Every loss is different, and I don't pretend to know what you're going through. Please know that I've known the depths. Please know that this is what I do know. I've known the depths of desperation and anger and confusion and grief and hurt, and what it means to hold tightly to my faith and hope in the Lord in the face of the unknown. I've known what it means to find a different kind of joy in the middle of what feels hopeless, and what it means to keep putting one foot in front of the other when it feels like I can't possibly take one more step without my person beside me. I know what it means to be paralyzed by a simple task, and what it feels like to need to make lunch for my family, and instead of it looking like putting chips in a sandwich on a plate, it looks like a mountain that needs to be climbed, and I just discovered that I was barefoot. I know what it feels like to wake up day after day feeling like you've been sucker punched yet again, and what it means to be forced to move forward in a life you never imagined and certainly don't want and didn't ask for. I'm familiar with the practice of living alongside people who are grieving the same person that you are in very different ways, and then caring for and walking with grieving little humans in the middle of so much of my own pain. I also know what it feels like when the shock wears off and how rude the reality becomes that life is still going on around you, and your own world feels like it's at a complete stop. It's terrible and broken and not how it's supposed to be. I've even experienced the days and bittersweet moments of surprise and delight as I've learned how to laugh and enjoy things again, even though I can no longer share them with Brock. And I know what it feels like to be proud of finally riding manageable waves of grief, only to be completely taken out by a 15-foot whitecap and never having seen it coming. Though big picture, I've held tightly to the hope we have in Christ, there are still some days that my reality feels too heavy and lonely and like a level of haze and darkness that will not be moved. Then there are other days that feel heavy, and the light seems to break through in unexpected and life-giving ways as a reminder that I'm not alone and he never left. He sees me fully in the depths of my despair, where I can't see a path forward. He's truly there. In the moments of joy and gratitude that are covered in unfettered hope, he's there. And the reality of the day-to-day is still so difficult and painful and heartbreaking. I know and I've experienced that some days God feels impossible. But I trust and believe for you, even when you might not be able to, that the Lord is in you and he's with you. And one thing that we do share is that our losses are not seasons that will pass. They are forever a part of our lives. Our losses will necessarily direct and inform and color all of who we are now and who we will become. Though I know full well that how grief manifests itself over time changes, the pain never fully goes away this side of heaven. It's not something that we'll graduate out of and move on from. It's not just a season of life living without our loved ones. It is our life. It's more than an acute wound that over time evolves into a constant dull ache that can flare up and even temporarily paralyze us till our own dying day. We'll carry on, but we'll never be the same. And there will be days ahead where we need the myrtles and the documentation of the light breaking through to remind us of what we feel is hard to believe in the darker moments. And so I think I skipped some pictures, but there's one I want you to see that after all of this long process, there's one with a flower at a gate. There we go. Okay, so I want to read this to you. Sorry, I feel like I've skipped around a lot, but This one's really important because in that hospital room, the day Brock died, the last thing I read to him was Isaiah 55, and at the end, it says, "For you shall go out in joy and be led forth in peace. The mountains and the hills before you shall break forth into singing. And all the trees of the field shall clap their hands. Instead of the thorn shall come up the cypress, instead of the briar shall come up the myrtle, and it shall make a name for the Lord, an everlasting sign that shall not be cut off." After this whole process, and it took 15 months to rebuild my home, the fire, I think I left this part out, but the fire was considered a total loss, and so I had to take that home back down to the slab and start over. And so it took another 15 months, and because of delays with insurance and just waiting for all of that to be approved. And so we rebuilt that. Yeah, there we are. Took it down to the slab and then rebuilt it. And so it was a long process, and in that my kids were grieving and traumatized, and anytime rain came, they panicked, and it felt lonely and difficult, and it was a long 15 months, but we got there, and that when I came home, I'd been gone for 2 weeks, they were finishing the house, and when I came home, that crepe myrtle was at my gate, and the Lord I didn't plant it there, and it had to have been there, and I just had never seen it, but it was blooming that day, and the Lord left. That was just such a sweet gift to remind me that there's myrtles, to remind us that he's still there, but that was before, it was after all of these hard things and after all of the heartache, but before things are just neatly tied up. I want to say, I can't find it, but it's before all of the hard things were finished, and before the Lord, not before the Lord was with me the whole time, but before the hard days were over, before the days where I want to trade my children in for something new because they're so hard, and before I quit considering boarding school because that's every other week, you guys. It's hard, it's difficult, and it's before the lonely nights end, and before I miss being a wife, and I miss having someone that's my person, and I have no idea how that will ever, how anybody else would ever fit. But before all of that happens, if it happens, the Lord is with us, and he's good, and you can trust him, and I think what I want to close with is just asking you what your worst case scenario is, and what is your What in your life are you afraid of? And what are you trying to control in your own life? And we don't have the control. I want to read you the scripture and leave you with one last thing. I'm running out of time. I feel like I could just talk to you forever, but we read this scripture at our wedding and had no idea. I had no idea what it was going to mean to me over the years, but it's in Habakkuk in the end, and it's, though the fig tree should not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, the produce of the olive fail, and the fields yield no food, and the flock be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls, yet I'll rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. God, the Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the deer's. He makes me tread on my high places. It's rejoicing in the Lord when we don't understand, and that doesn't always look like a happy face. I've learned that joy doesn't look like what I thought it looks like, but that joy, the joy where it says take joy in many trials, that happens when you're able to trust. And the abundant life that we're promised happens because when we're able to trust and really get to that place where you surrender your own control and trust that when you can't understand what's going on and you're still longing for that baby, or you're still longing to be married, or you're still longing for all when those in between, when those desires haven't been fulfilled, and in this life that might not happen. There's going to be heartache, but living in that trust and really saying, I trust you when I don't understand. And I think it's time. On the way here this morning, this is what I thought. I want to close with this, that it's time for many of us to stop living in the fear of the what ifs and the bitterness about the whys and the how comes. We don't have control. We never did. And the sooner that we realize that and exchange that control for trust, the sooner we start living the abundant life he promised.